I never thought my best friend would be the one to destroy me. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the sharpest knives, and Madison Pierce had been sharpening hers for years. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and this is the story of how I learned that revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about getting free. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, Madison and I were inseparable. We met in third grade when her family moved into the house next door, and from that moment, we were joined at the hip. She was everything I wasn't: blonde, bubbly, born into money. Her father owned 3 car dealerships, her mother hosted charity galas, and their house looked like something out of a magazine. My parents, on the other hand, were hard-working immigrants from Mexico. Dad worked double shifts at the steel mill, Mom cleaned houses during the day and took in sewing at night. Our house was small but filled with love, laughter, and the constant smell of my grandmother's tamales. Madison never seemed to mind the difference in our backgrounds. In fact, she seemed fascinated by my family's closeness, always wanting to stay for dinner, always asking my mom to teach her Spanish words. I thought she genuinely loved being part of our world. I was so naive. We went through everything together: first crushes, high school drama, college applications. When I got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship, Madison surprised everyone by choosing the same school, even though she'd been accepted to Princeton. "I can't imagine college without my best friend," she'd said, hugging me tight. "We're going to conquer the world together, Elena." College was where things started to shift, though I didn't see it at the time. Madison joined the most exclusive sorority on campus, started dating guys from wealthy families, began talking about networking and making the right connections. She'd invite me to parties where I clearly didn't fit in, then spend the evening apologizing to her new friends for my clothes, my accent when I spoke Spanish to my parents on the phone, my scholarship status. "Elena's just so authentic," she'd say with a laugh that felt like glass breaking. "She keeps me grounded." After graduation, we both moved to Chicago. Madison landed a job at her father's friend's investment firm, while I started at the bottom of a marketing agency, working 16-hour days to prove myself. Slowly, I climbed the ladder, earning every promotion through blood, sweat, and countless missed dinners. By 28, I'd made senior account manager and was finally making decent money. Madison had bounced between 3 different jobs, each one secured through family connections, each one abandoned when she got bored. That's when she met David. David Chin was everything Madison thought she wanted: tall, successful, came from old money. His family owned a chain of high-end restaurants across the Midwest. He was sophisticated, well-traveled, spoke 4 languages, and had this quiet confidence that drew people in. The first time Madison brought him to one of our weekly dinners, I felt something shift in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, but recognition. David and I talked for hours about books, about travel, about our shared love of architecture. When he mentioned his volunteer work with underprivileged kids, I saw his eyes light up in a way that reminded me of my father talking about his community garden. Madison spent the evening on her phone, occasionally looking up to laugh too loudly at something that wasn't particularly funny. "He's perfect, isn't he?" she whispered to me in the bathroom later. "I mean, his family has serious money, Elena. This could be it for me." I nodded and smiled, pushing down the uncomfortable feeling that she was talking about David like a business acquisition rather than a person she loved. Over the next few months, I watched their relationship unfold with growing unease. Madison would call me after every date, dissecting every word David said, analyzing every gesture. But she never talked about how he made her feel, never mentioned falling in love. It was always about what he could provide, what doors his family could open, what kind of life he could give her. "You know what I love most about David?" she said one evening as we shared a bottle of wine at her apartment. He's stable, reliable. He'll never leave me wondering where I stand. But do you love him? I asked quietly. She looked at me like I'd asked if she believed in unicorns. Elena, love is a luxury. Security is a necessity. David offers security. Meanwhile, David and I had started talking more whenever the three of us hung out. He'd ask about my work, my family, my dreams. He remembered details from previous conversations, asked thoughtful follow-up questions. When I mentioned wanting to visit Spain someday, he spent 20 minutes telling me about his favorite hidden spots in Barcelona, writing down restaurant recommendations on a napkin that I still kept in my wallet. I tried to ignore the way my heart raced when he laughed at my jokes, the way his hand lingered when he passed me a drink, the way he looked at me when Madison wasn't paying attention. 6 months into their relationship, Madison started planning their future with military precision. She had binders full of wedding venues, engagement ring styles, honeymoon destinations. She'd mapped out their entire life together before David had even said, "I love you." "I think he's going to propose at Christmas," she told me excitedly in November. His sister let it slip that he's been looking at rings. "This is it, Elena. I'm going to be Mrs. David Chen." The way she said his name, like she was already practicing her signature, made my stomach turn. 2 weeks before Christmas, David asked me to meet him for coffee. We'd never hung out without Madison before, and I almost said no. But something in his voice sounded urgent, desperate even. He was already there when I arrived at our usual cafe, staring into his cup like it held the answers to the universe. "Elena, I need to talk to someone," he said before I'd even sat down. "I'm going crazy keeping this inside." My heart started pounding. "What's wrong?" He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Complete vulnerability. "I don't think I can marry her," he whispered. The words hung between us like a confession. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever I said next would determine whether I fell or flew. "Why?" I managed to ask. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I wake up every morning thinking about someone else. Because I've fallen in love with the wrong person at exactly the wrong time." He reached across the table and touched my hand, just for a second, but it felt like lightning. "Elena, Don't," I whispered, pulling my hand away. "Please don't say it." Because if he said it, if he put words to what had been building between us for months, there would be no going back. Madison was my best friend. I couldn't betray her like that. Could I? "She doesn't love me," David said quietly. "Not really. She loves what I represent, what I can give her. But she doesn't see me, Elena. Not the way you do." I stared at him, my mind racing. Everything he was saying was true. I'd watched Madison treat him like a prize she'd won rather than a person she adored. I'd seen her dismiss his interests, ignore his stories, check her phone while he talked. But she was still my best friend. The girl who'd held my hair back when I had food poisoning freshman year. Who'd driven 6 hours to be with me when my grandmother died. Who'd been there for every heartbreak, every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday of the past 20 years. "I have to go," I said, standing up so quickly I knocked over my chair. "Elena, please." "I can't do this, David. I won't do this to her." I walked out of that cafe and straight into the biggest mistake of my life. Instead of being honest with Madison, instead of telling her what David had said, what I was feeling, I did what I thought was the noble thing. I stayed silent. I watched her plan their engagement party, helped her pick out her dress, listened to her gush about the ring she was expecting. And on Christmas Eve, David proposed. Madison called me at midnight crying with happiness, demanding I come over immediately to see the ring. It was beautiful. A vintage Art Deco setting with a perfect round diamond, exactly what she'd circled in her magazines. "Isn't it gorgeous?" she squealed, waving her hand in front of my face. "He said it belonged to his grandmother. Can you believe it? I'm engaged, Elena. I'm actually engaged." David stood behind her, looking like a man walking to his execution. When Madison went to call her parents, he caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." That's when I knew I'd made the wrong choice. But it was too late now. The engagement was official, the wedding planning had begun, and I was trapped in a prison of my own making. Chapter 2: The Unraveling. The next 6 months were torture. Madison threw herself into wedding planning with the intensity of a military campaign, and somehow I became her unwilling lieutenant in the war against good taste and budget consciousness. "Elena, you have to see this venue," she'd say, dragging me to places that cost more per night than my parents made in a month. "It's only $30,000 for the reception." David's parents said money's no object. I watched her transform from the girl I'd known into someone I barely recognized. She became demanding, entitled, treating vendors like servants and expecting everyone to cater to her every whim. "The flowers aren't right," she snapped at the wedding planner during one particularly brutal meeting. "I said white roses with baby's breath, not this. This mess. Do I have to do everything myself?" The wedding planner, a sweet woman named Carol who'd been doing this for 20 years, looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "Madison," I said quietly, "maybe we could." "Elena, please. This is my wedding, not yours. Some of us actually care about getting the details right." The comment stung, mostly because of the way she said it, like I was somehow less than her because I wasn't planning a wedding, wasn't engaged, wasn't living up to her timeline of life milestones. David and I barely spoke during this period. When the three of us were together, the tension was suffocating. He'd look at me with these desperate eyes, and I'd look away, focusing on Madison's endless chatter about centerpieces and seating charts. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I'd let myself imagine what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight for what I wanted. If I'd told Madison the truth about David's feelings, about my own. The breaking point came at Madison's bridal shower, 3 months before the wedding. Her mother had rented out the entire top floor of the country club, decorated with enough white and gold to supply a small palace. 50 of Madison's closest friends and family members, all dressed in pastels, all playing the part of the perfect supporting cast in Madison's perfect life performance. I'd spent weeks planning this shower, coordinating with her mother, arranging games, ordering the perfect cake. I'd also spent more than I could afford on a beautiful silk scarf from Madison's favorite boutique, something she'd admired months ago but said was too expensive. The shower started beautifully. Madison looked radiant in a flowing white dress, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured animatedly. She opened gifts with theatrical gasps of delight, each present more expensive than the last. When she got to mine, she held up the scarf with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Oh, Elena, this is gorgeous. I remember looking at this months ago. Thank you so much." She hugged me, and for a moment, it felt like old times. Like we were just two girls celebrating life's happy moments together. Then she opened the gift from David's sister, Rachel. It was a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a single pearl charm. "Oh," Madison said, her smile faltering slightly. "It's nice." She set it aside quickly, moving on to the next gift. But I caught the look that passed between her and her mother, a look of disappointment, of judgment. Later, during the mimosa-fueled gift evaluation session that Madison's friends called Rating the Loot, the truth came out. I mean, David's sister seems sweet, Madison was saying to her sorority sisters, but clearly she doesn't understand our family's standards. That bracelet probably cost $50. $50 for a wedding gift. Maybe she's struggling financially, suggested one of her friends. Madison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Please, David's family owns half the restaurants in Chicago. She's just cheap. Or maybe she doesn't approve of me. I listened to this conversation from the kitchen, where I was helping slice the cake, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Rachel Chin was one of the kindest people I'd ever met. She was a pediatric nurse who spent her free time volunteering at homeless shelters. The bracelet she'd given Madison was handmade by women in a fair trade cooperative, something Rachel had probably chosen specifically because it represented empowerment and sustainability, values she cared deeply about. But Madison saw only the price tag. Speaking of standards, Madison continued, and I could hear the whine in her voice now. You guys should see the bridesmaid dress Elena picked out for herself. My blood turned to ice. I gave all the girls a budget and color palette, right? Keep it under 200, anything in sage green. Everyone else managed to find something beautiful. But Elena shows up to the fitting in this thing. I heard her friends murmur encouragingly, hungry for gossip. It's from Target, you guys. Target, and it's not even the right shade of green. It's more like army green? With this weird polyester shine? I was so embarrassed I didn't know what to say. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of my knife hitting the cutting board, over and over, as I mechanically sliced cake that suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I mean, I love Elena to death, Madison continued. But sometimes I wonder if she does these things on purpose. Like she wants to stand out, you know? Make some kind of statement about being different. Maybe you should talk to her, one of her friends suggested. I've tried, but Elena's always been sensitive about money. Her family situation, you know. I think sometimes she resents that things come easier for me. I set down the knife carefully, my hands shaking with rage. The dress Madison was mocking was the most expensive thing I'd owned in years. I'd saved for 2 months to afford it, skipping lunches and walking to work instead of taking the train. I'd spent hours at that Target trying on every green dress they had, finally settling on one that I thought was beautiful, that made me feel confident and elegant. But more than that, Madison knew exactly why I'd been careful with money lately. 6 months ago, my father had been injured at the steel mill. Workers' comp was covering some of his medical bills, but not all. I'd been sending money home every month to help my parents, money that would have otherwise gone to a more expensive bridesmaid dress. Madison knew this. I confided in her about the stress, the worry, the guilt of watching my proud father struggle with accepting financial help from his daughter. And she'd used it as entertainment for her country club friends. I walked back into the main room carrying the perfect slices of cake, my face composed in a smile that felt like armor. Elena, Madison called out brightly, we were just talking about you. Were you? I said, setting down the cake platter with deliberate care. I was telling everyone how dedicated you've been to the wedding planning. You're such a good friend. She said it with complete sincerity, as if she hadn't just spent 5 minutes destroying me behind my back. As if she genuinely believed that calling me a good friend erased the cruelty that had come before. That's when I realized something that changed everything. Madison wasn't just thoughtless or stressed about her wedding. She was cruel. And she'd been cruel to me for years, so gradually that I'd learned to accept it as normal. The girl who held my hair back when I was sick had also been the one making subtle digs about my scholarship status. The friend who drove 6 hours when my grandmother died had also been the one who forgot to invite me to her birthday dinner sophomore year, then acted like it was an innocent oversight. Madison Pierce had been slowly, systematically diminishing me for 20 years, and I'd been so grateful for her friendship that I'd let her. But not anymore. I stayed for the rest of the shower, playing the part of the devoted maid of honor. I helped clean up, kissed Madison goodbye, promised to call her about the final dress fitting next week. Then I went home and did something I'd never done before. I started planning my revenge. Not the screaming, dramatic kind of revenge you see in movies. Something better. Something that would give Madison exactly what she deserved while setting me free from 20 years of accepting less than I was worth. It started with a phone call. "Hello, David? It's Elena. We need to talk." Chapter 3, The Revolution. David and I met at a different cafe this time, one across town where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Elena," he said as I sat down, "I'm glad you called, but if this is about Madison—" "It's not," I interrupted. "Well, it is, but not in the way you think." I took a deep breath, gathering courage I didn't know I possessed. "I heard something at the bridal shower yesterday, something that made me realize I've been living a lie for 20 years. I told him about Madison's conversation, about the dress, about all the small cruelties I'd finally allowed myself to see clearly." David's face grew darker with each detail. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she—" "Of course you didn't. Madison's very good at showing different faces to different people, but that's not why I asked you here." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you love her?" David stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "No, I don't think I ever did. I loved the idea of her, maybe. The way she seemed so confident, so sure of what she wanted. But the person I've gotten to know over the past 8 months—" He shook his head. "She's not who I thought she was." "Then why are you marrying her?" "Because I'm a coward," he said simply. "Because it's easier than admitting I made a mistake. Because I'm 31 years old, and I thought this was what I was supposed to want." He looked up at me, and I saw that vulnerability again, raw and desperate. "Elena, that day we had coffee before Christmas, I meant what I said. I think about you constantly. When something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. When something's wrong, you're the voice I want to hear. You challenge me, you make me laugh, you see parts of me that I'd forgotten existed." My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. "But it doesn't matter," he continued. "I made my choice. I gave Madison a ring. I can't just—" "What if you could?" The words were out before I could stop them. David stared at me. "What are you saying?" I thought about Madison's laughter at the bridal shower, about 20 years of feeling like I wasn't quite good enough, about the life I'd been too scared to fight for. "I'm saying maybe it's time we both stopped being cowards." What happened next felt like stepping off a cliff. David reached across the table and took my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. "Elena," he whispered, "are you sure? Because if we do this, there's no going back. Madison will never forgive us, your friendship." "What friendship?" I asked, and I was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "You can't betray someone who's already betrayed you 100 times over." We talked for 3 hours. We made plans. We acknowledged that what we were doing would hurt people, would cause chaos, would probably destroy some relationships forever. But we also acknowledged something else, that we deserved better than lives built on settling, on fear, on pretending to be happy with scraps when we could have the whole feast. "The wedding's in 2 months," David said as we prepared to leave. "What do we do until then?" "We wait," I said. "We plan. And we give Madison exactly the wedding she deserves." The next 6 weeks were the strangest of my life. I continued playing the role of the devoted maid of honor, attending dress fittings and flower consultations and rehearsal dinner planning sessions. But everything felt different now, like I was watching a play instead of living my life. Madison, meanwhile, seemed to sense that something had shifted, though she couldn't put her finger on what. "You seem different lately," she said one afternoon as we addressed wedding invitations. "More confident. It's nice. Maybe you're finally getting over that whole shy thing you've had going on." I smiled and continued writing addresses in my careful calligraphy. Maybe I am. David and I were careful. We didn't see each other alone again, didn't text or call. But when the three of us were together, something electric hummed in the air between us. Madison was too focused on wedding details to notice, but I caught David looking at me sometimes with an expression that made my knees weak. 3 weeks before the wedding, I did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I quit my job. "Elena, what are you talking about?" My boss, Janet, looked stunned. "You're our best account manager. I was going to discuss a promotion with you next month." "I know," I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. "But I've been offered a position somewhere else. Something that's more aligned with my values." It wasn't technically a lie. David and I had talked about it during one of our careful conversations in Madison's presence. His family's restaurant group was expanding, looking for someone to head their new community outreach program, working with local schools, organizing fundraisers for food banks, creating partnerships with urban farms. It was a job that would use my marketing skills while doing something meaningful. It paid well, but wasn't about climbing corporate ladders or impressing clients with expense accounts. It was about making a difference. It was the job I dreamed about but never thought I deserved. "When's your last day?" Janet asked reluctantly. "Today," I said. I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to colleagues who looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and walked out of that building feeling like I was emerging from prison. 2 weeks before the wedding, Madison had her final dress fitting. She'd asked all her bridesmaids to come, ostensibly to see how everything looked together, but really because she wanted an audience for her big moment. The dress was beautiful, a strapless ball gown with intricate beadwork that cost more than my car. Madison looked stunning in it, like a princess from a fairy tale. "Oh my God," breathed her sister. "Madison, you look perfect." "I feel perfect," Madison said, spinning in front of the three-way mirror. "This is exactly how I imagined it. Exactly." She turned to look at us, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Can you believe it's finally happening? In 2 weeks, I'll be Mrs. David Chen. My whole life is falling into place exactly the way I planned." That's when she noticed my dress. I'd been saving it for this moment, this final fitting where all the bridesmaids would be together. Instead of the Target dress Madison had mocked, I was wearing something new. Something that had cost 3 months' salary at my old job, but that I could now afford thanks to my new position with the Chen Family Restaurant Group. It was a sage green silk dress from a high-end boutique, with delicate embroidery and a cut that flattered every curve. It was elegant, sophisticated, and absolutely perfect. Madison's smile faltered as she took it in. "Elena," she said slowly, "what are you wearing?" "My bridesmaid dress," I said innocently. "You said sage green, right? I thought this would photograph beautifully." "That's not the dress you showed me." "No, I found something better. I hope that's okay?" I watched her struggle with how to respond. She couldn't very well complain that I looked too good, that my dress was too expensive, that I was upstaging her without sounding petty and jealous. It's fine, she said finally. I just wish you told me you were changing dresses. But I could see the calculation in her eyes, the slight panic. For the first time in our friendship, I looked like her equal. For the first time, she couldn't dismiss me as the charity case, the scholarship girl, the friend who was grateful for whatever scraps of attention she threw my way. Actually, I said casually, I should probably mention that I won't be able to make it to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. Madison's eyes widened. What? Elena? You're the maid of honor. You have to be there. I know, and I'm so sorry. Something came up. Work stuff. What work stuff? You quit your job. My new job, I said calmly. I'm starting Monday, and there's an important client dinner tomorrow night that I can't miss. Madison looked like she was about to explode. Elena Rodriguez, you cannot miss my rehearsal dinner for some stupid work thing. This is my wedding. The other bridesmaids were staring now, sensing drama. The seamstress had frozen with her pins, pretending not to listen. Madison, I said gently, I understand you're disappointed. But this is a really important opportunity for me. You of all people should understand how crucial it is to make a good impression in a new job. I was lying, of course. There was no client dinner. But there was something else planned for tomorrow night, something that Madison would find out about soon enough. Fine, Madison said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. Miss my rehearsal dinner. But you better be at that church on Saturday, Elena. You better be there with a smile on your face, ready to stand by my side. Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss your wedding for the world. And I meant it. I would absolutely be at Madison Pierce's wedding. Just not in the way she expected. Chapter 4, The Reckoning. The morning of Madison's wedding dawned gray and drizzly, which felt appropriate for what was about to unfold. I woke up in David's apartment, our first night together, though we'd done nothing but talk and hold each other, both too nervous about what lay ahead to think about anything else. Are you sure about this? He asked for the 100th time as we shared coffee and barely touched toast. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said, and realized it was true. The plan was simple. David would go through with the morning preparations, get dressed, arrive at the church as expected. I would show up as planned, in my bridesmaid dress, ready to walk down the aisle. But instead of standing at the altar watching Madison marry the wrong man for the wrong reasons, I would object when the minister asked if anyone had reason why they shouldn't be wed. And then David and I would walk out of that church together, leaving Madison to face the truth about the hollow life she'd built on other people's diminishment. It sounds cruel when I put it like that. And maybe it was. But sometimes cruelty is just honesty delivered at an inconvenient time. I arrived at the church at noon, 3 hours before the ceremony. The bridal party was getting ready in the basement fellowship hall, a flurry of curling irons and champagne and nervous laughter. Madison looked radiant, I had to admit. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her dress a vision of white silk and pearls. She was everything a bride should be on her wedding day. Elena, she squealed when she saw me. Oh my God, I'm so nervous. Can you believe this is actually happening? She hugged me tight, and for a moment I felt a flicker of doubt. This was the girl I'd shared everything with for 20 years. The girl who'd been my sister in every way that mattered. But then she pulled back and I saw her eyes, calculating, assessing, making sure I looked appropriately subordinate on her big day. Your hair looks nice, she said with just a hint of surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to figure out how to use a curling iron. Thank you, I said calmly. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of photographs and last-minute touch-ups, and Madison's escalating anxiety. She snapped at the photographer, criticized the flower arrangements, sent her sister to recheck the reception hall setup twice. "Everything has to be perfect," she kept saying. "This is the most important day of my life." At 2:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Madison's mother came rushing into the fellowship hall with a look of panic on her face. "Madison, honey, we have a problem." Madison, who was getting a final powder touch-up, went rigid. "What kind of problem?" "There's someone here who—" "Well, who says he needs to speak with David before the ceremony?" Madison's face went white beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Who?" "His name is Marcus Chen. He says he's David's brother?" The room went silent. I felt my heart start to race, but not with panic, with anticipation. Because Marcus Chen was indeed David's brother. His older brother, who lived in Seattle, who Madison had met exactly once at a family dinner 8 months ago. Marcus Chen, who had flown in this morning with some very interesting information about his family's finances. "I don't understand," Madison said faintly. "Marcus is supposed to be the best man. Why does he need to speak with David now?" "He seems upset about something," her mother said carefully. "He mentioned something about the restaurant business? About some kind of financial irregularities?" I watched Madison's face cycle through confusion, fear, and dawning realization. You see, Madison had spent months bragging about the Chen family wealth, about the restaurant empire, about the security David could provide. She'd never bothered to verify any of it, never asked the hard questions, never looked beyond the surface presentation. If she had, she might have discovered that the Chen family restaurants were struggling. Had been struggling for 2 years, in fact, hemorrhaging money due to poor management and increased competition. She might have learned that David's parents had been keeping the business afloat by taking out loans against their personal assets, loans that were coming due. She might have realized that David's job at the investment firm, the one that paid for his nice apartment and expensive clothes, had been eliminated in the latest round of layoffs. He'd been too proud to tell anyone, too ashamed to admit that the stable, financially secure life Madison expected him to provide was built on quicksand. But she'd never asked, because she'd never been interested in David the person, only David the bank account. "Maybe I should go see what's wrong," I suggested innocently. "No," Madison said sharply. "No, I'll go. This is my wedding day, and I'm not letting anyone ruin it." She gathered up her skirts and marched upstairs, leaving a trail of confused bridesmaids in her wake. I followed at a discreet distance, curious to see how this particular revelation would unfold. Madison found Marcus and David in the church office, deep in heated conversation. Through the cracked door, I could hear fragments. Should have told her months ago. Not about the money, it's about the lying. She deserves to know what she's getting into. Madison burst through the door like an avenging angel in white silk. "What is going on?" she demanded. "David, why is your brother trying to ruin our wedding?" David looked up at her with exhausted eyes. "Madison, we need to talk." "We can talk after the ceremony. There are 200 people out there waiting for us." "That's exactly why we need to talk now." David stood up, straightening his tie with trembling hands. "Madison, there are some things I should have told you. About my family's financial situation. About my job. About a lot of things." I watched Madison's face go through a series of micro-expressions as the implications sank in. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not the man you think you're marrying." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stared at David like he was speaking a foreign language. I don't understand, she said finally. You're David Chen. Your family owns restaurants. You have a good job. You're my fiancé. The restaurants are failing, Madison. Have been for 2 years. My parents are facing bankruptcy, and I lost my job 3 months ago. Madison stumbled backward like she'd been slapped. 3 months ago? You lost your job 3 months ago and you didn't tell me? I was trying to figure out how to fix it. I thought maybe I could find something else before the wedding, before you had to know. Before I had to know? Madison's voice was rising now, her careful composure cracking. David, we're supposed to be partners. How could you lie to me about something this important? David looked at her with something like pity. Because I knew this is exactly how you'd react. Because I knew that the moment the money was gone, you'd be gone too. The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. That's not true, Madison said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? David asked quietly. Madison, when was the last time you asked me how I was feeling about anything that didn't involve our wedding? When was the last time you wanted to know about my dreams, my fears, my hopes for our future beyond the house we buy and the cars we drive? Madison opened and closed her mouth like a fish, unable to form words. I loved you, David continued. Or I thought I did. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was in love with the idea of being the man you wanted me to be, not with actually being that man. Madison's carefully applied makeup was starting to streak now, tears cutting through the foundation like rivers through sand. So what are you saying? She whispered. That you don't want to marry me? David looked at his brother, then back at Madison. I'm saying I can't marry you. Not like this. Not when we both know it would be built on lies. That's when Madison turned and saw me standing in the doorway. Elena? Her voice was small, confused. What are you doing here? I came to check on you, I said gently. I heard voices and thought you might need support. Madison stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Suspicion crept into her eyes. How long have you been standing there? Just a few minutes. Did you know? She asked suddenly. About David's job? About the restaurants? I could have lied. Could have played innocent, let the moment pass without revealing my hand. But I was tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of being the good girl who absorbed everyone else's cruelty with a smile. Yes, I said simply. Madison's face went white, then red, then white again. You knew and you didn't tell me. Would it have mattered? I asked. Would you have married him anyway, if you'd known the money was gone? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Madison looked around the room, at David, at Marcus, at me, as if searching for someone to tell her what the right answer was supposed to be. Of course I would have, she said finally, but her voice was hollow. Would you? I pressed. Really? Because I remember you telling me that love was a luxury and security was a necessity. I remember you saying that David offered security. Madison's mouth fell open. Elena, I can't believe you're throwing my private conversations back at me at a time like this. Why not? You had no problem throwing my private struggles back at me when you wanted to entertain your friends at the bridal shower. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't regret them. Madison recoiled like I'd slapped her. What are you talking about? I'm talking about how you told everyone at your shower that my dress was cheap, that I shop at Target, that I resent your success. I'm talking about how you turned my family's financial struggles into a punchline for your country club friends. Madison's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route. Elena, I didn't mean. You did mean it, just like you meant it every time you introduced me as your authentic friend who keeps you grounded. Every time you apologized for my clothes, my accent, my scholarship status. Every time you made me feel grateful for scraps of friendship while you fed on making me feel small. David was staring at me now, and I saw something like admiration in his eyes. Madison, he said quietly, is this true? Madison looked between us, trapped, and for the first time in 20 years, I saw her without her mask of confident superiority. I was just being honest about our differences. Elena knows I love her. Do I asked. Because love doesn't feel like spending 20 years being diminished. Love doesn't feel like being mocked behind my back for wearing a dress I saved for months to afford. Madison started crying in earnest now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks in dark streams. Elena, please. You're my best friend. You're my maid of honor. We can work this out after the wedding. There are people waiting. Yes, I said. There are people waiting. 200 people who came here to watch you marry a man you don't actually love, using money that doesn't exist, in a wedding that's more about performance than partnership. I took a deep breath, gathering the courage for what came next. So here's what's going to happen. David and I are going to walk out of this church together. We're going to get in my car, and we're going to drive away from this beautiful disaster you've created. Madison's sobs stopped abruptly. What did you say? You heard me. Elena, David said softly. Are you sure? I turned to look at him. Really look at him. This man who saw me, who valued my thoughts, who made me feel like the best version of myself instead of a consolation prize. I've never been more sure of anything. Madison was staring at us in horror as the pieces finally clicked into place. Oh my God, you too. You've been behind my back? We haven't done anything behind your back, I said firmly. But we're not going to keep pretending we don't care about each other to protect your feelings. Not when you've never shown the slightest concern for ours. Madison looked at David with desperate eyes. David, please. I love you. I do love you. The money doesn't matter. We can figure it out together. David looked at her with infinite sadness. Madison, 3 minutes ago you were ready to call off the wedding because I lost my job. If you love me, it's not in a way that's healthy for either of us. But what about everything we planned? The life we were going to build? What life? David asked gently. You planned a wedding, Madison. You picked out a house, chose china patterns, designed a perfect Instagram version of marriage. But you never once asked me what I wanted our actual life to look like. Madison turned back to me, her eyes wild with rage and betrayal. Elena Rodriguez, you are not walking out of my wedding with my fiancé. I won't let you. You can't stop me, I said calmly. Just like I couldn't stop you from spending 20 years making me feel like I should be grateful for whatever crumbs of friendship you threw my way. I walked over to David and took his hand. His fingers intertwined with mine like they'd been waiting their whole lives to fit together. Madison, I said, turning back to face her one last time. I hope someday you learn the difference between being loved and being useful. I hope you find someone who sees you for who you really are and loves you anyway. But it's not David, and it never was. We started walking toward the door, and Madison's voice followed us, high and desperate. Elena, wait. You can't do this. What about our friendship? What about everything we've been through together? I paused in the doorway and looked back at her. This woman who had shaped so much of my life, who had been my constant companion through 2 decades of growing up. Our friendship ended the moment you decided I was worth less than you, I said quietly. I just finally got brave enough to notice. David and I walked out of that church office hand in hand, past the wedding party gathered in the hallway, past Madison's mother who stood frozen with shock, past the groomsmen who were beginning to realize something had gone very wrong. We walked through the sanctuary where 200 guests sat waiting for a wedding that was never going to happen, their faces turning toward us with confusion and growing alarm. And we walked out into the gray afternoon, into the rain that had started to fall, into a future that was uncertain, but finally, ours. Behind us, I could hear Madison's voice rising to a wail, and part of me felt sorry for her. Sorry for the girl who had never learned that real love means building people up instead of tearing them down. Sorry for the woman who had confused being envied with being loved. But mostly, I felt free. "Where do we go now?" David asked as we reached my car. I looked at him, this man I'd fallen in love with slowly, carefully, against my better judgment, and smiled. "Anywhere we want," I said. And we drove away from the wreckage of Madison Pierce's perfect wedding into the first day of our imperfect, honest, beautiful life together. Epilogue. 6 months later. I'm writing this from the kitchen of our apartment in Portland, where David and I moved 3 months ago to start fresh. He's working with a nonprofit that provides business consulting to struggling restaurants, using his experience to help family-owned places stay afloat. I'm heading the marketing department for a sustainable food cooperative that serves low-income communities. We're not rich. We probably never will be, at least not in the way Madison defined wealth. But we're building something real together, something based on shared values and genuine affection, and the kind of deep partnership that can't be bought or performed or planned in a wedding binder. I heard through mutual friends that Madison eventually went through with a wedding 6 months later, not to David, obviously, but to someone she met at her cousin's New Year's party. A hedge fund manager, apparently. Someone who could provide the security she'd always prioritized over love. I hope she's happy. I really do. Not because I've forgiven her. Forgiveness is complicated, and I'm still working through 20 years of accumulated hurt, but because carrying anger is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy now. Sometimes I think about that day at the church, about the choice I made to finally fight for what I wanted, instead of accepting what I thought I deserved. It was terrifying and messy and hurt people I cared about. But it was also the first time in my adult life that I chose myself. The first time I decided that my happiness mattered as much as everyone else's comfort. The funny thing is, I don't think I could have done it without Madison. Without watching her reduce love to a transaction, marriage to a performance, friendship to a hierarchy with herself at the top. She taught me, inadvertently, what I didn't want my life to look like. She taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who need you to stay small so they can feel big. And that recognizing that dynamic isn't betrayal, it's survival. David is calling me from the living room now, asking if I want to help him prep vegetables for the dinner we're cooking together. It's a simple moment, the kind Madison would have found boring, unmarketable, not worth posting about. But it's ours. Built on honesty instead of performance, on partnership instead of transaction, on the radical idea that love should make you feel more like yourself, not less. And that, I've learned, is worth fighting for. Even if it means walking away from everything you thought you wanted to find what you actually needed. Especially then,